The first time Ivy Rourke fell asleep on my arm, she didn't ask permission. She didn't warn me. She just tipped sideways somewhere around midnight, her head landing against my shoulder like it had been reserved there the whole time. And I sat completely still in a plastic ferry terminal chair, afraid that breathing wrong might undo it. Don't move, I told myself. Nobody else heard that part. My arm had gone numb somewhere around 1 a.m., and I still didn't move it, because I was 26 years old, supposedly a grown man with a functioning spine, and I would have let that arm fall off at the shoulder before I woke her up. My name is Dean Whitfield. I worked as a marine biologist assistant out of a research station near Port Angeles, which sounded a lot more impressive at parties than it actually was. Mostly I logged water samples and got seasick less often than my coworkers. I was also, for reasons that felt increasingly unfair, hopelessly in love with my best friend's little sister. Not so little anymore. Ivy was 24, an environmental law student who argued with strangers on principle and had once made a ferry worker cry, not out of cruelty, but because she'd politely dismantled his entire explanation of why the 6:15 crossing didn't count as late if it left at 6:16. She had reddish-brown hair that never stayed in whatever clip she'd used to pin it, a laugh that came out sideways like it had snuck past a guard she usually kept posted, and the specific talent of making me feel like the most interesting person in a room I had entered by accident. Her brother, Chase, had been my best friend since college. We'd shared a dorm room, a truly unfortunate mustache phase, and 4 years of ill-advised road trips. When Chase invited me along to help his family move their grandmother's things off the island before winter, I said yes before I'd finished hearing the sentence. Not because I loved hauling furniture, because Ivy was coming too. For context, the plan had been simple. Take the evening ferry across, help move boxes for 2 days, take the ferry back Sunday night. Chase had a work call he couldn't miss Monday morning, so he'd flown back early Saturday afternoon, leaving Ivy and me to finish loading the last truck and catch the last crossing alone. The 2 days before that had been ordinary, in the specific way that only becomes extraordinary in hindsight. We spent Friday hauling boxes out of a house that smelled like cedar and old photographs, Chase directing traffic like a man who had appointed himself general contractor of a 2-person operation, Ivy narrating the contents of every box like a tour guide at a museum nobody had asked to visit. Exhibit A, she announced, holding up a chipped ceramic rooster. A decorative item purchased, according to family legend, at a yard sale in 1994 for the express purpose of annoying Grandpa. It worked, Chase said. He hated that rooster for 30 years. He hated it so much he kept it on the mantle out of spite, Ivy said. That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. That's not romance, that's a grudge. In this family, they're the same thing. I laughed too loud at that, the way I did at most things Ivy said, and caught Chase watching me for a half-second longer than the joke warranted. He didn't say anything. He just handed me a heavier box than necessary and told me to focus, which I understood. Even then, as a small warning shot I chose not to examine too closely. Saturday afternoon, after Chase had gone, Ivy and I worked through the last of the kitchen boxes in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable so much as loaded, the kind that happens between two people who have run out of small talk and haven't yet decided whether to move to something bigger. At one point she reached past me for a stack of plates, her arm brushing mine, and neither of us moved away right away. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. It felt considerably longer. "You've got a little," I said, and reached toward her cheek before I'd fully decided to, brushing away a smear of dust near her jaw. Her eyes came up to mine, startled, and for one unguarded second something passed between us that neither of us had a name ready for. Then a box slipped off the counter behind her, and the moment scattered along with a dozen mismatched forks across the kitchen floor, and we spent the next 5 minutes picking up cutlery and very studiously not discussing what had almost happened. I told myself it was nothing. I had gotten remarkably good, over 3 years, at telling myself things like that, and mostly believing it. That should have been the whole story. 2 friends, 1 ferry, 90 minutes of water between 2 shorelines. Instead, the terminal loudspeaker crackled to life at 9:40 p.m. and informed a room full of tired, salt-crusted passengers that the 10:05 sailing had been canceled due to mechanical inspection, and the next available crossing wouldn't leave until 6 a.m. "You're joking," Ivy said, to no one, to the ceiling, to whatever cruel maritime god had scheduled this. "We're moving furniture out of a dead woman's kitchen for 11 hours, and the reward is a night in these chairs." "She's not dead," I said. "She's in Arizona. She might as well be dead to this Ferry line's sense of decency." I laughed before I could stop myself. Ivy had that effect. She said the wrong thing so precisely it became the right thing. We found 2 seats near the vending machines, bolted together plastic chairs designed by someone who had clearly never intended for a human body to occupy them for more than 15 minutes. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Outside the windows, fog sat low over the water like it had moved in to stay. "I texted Chase," Ivy said, holding up her phone. "He says, and I quote, 'LOL, have fun. Don't let Dean's snoring flag down the Coast Guard.'" "I don't snore. You made a noise on the drive up that a marine biologist should be alarmed by. That was allergies. That was a distress call from your sinuses." She tucked her knees up onto the chair, wrapping her arms around them. "This is fine. We're fine. We'll just sit here like 2 extremely tired airport strangers until sunrise." Very romantic. The word left my mouth before I'd fully checked it for safety. Ivy glanced at me sideways, one eyebrow lifting just slightly, and for a second I thought she might actually comment on it. She didn't. She let it sit there between us, unclaimed, and reached instead for the granola bar in her bag. I should explain something about Ivy and me, because on paper it looks uncomplicated. She was my best friend's sister. I had known her since she was 19 and furious about a parking ticket. And over the 5 years since, our relationship had built itself slowly out of shared holidays, group trips, and the particular kind of late-night phone calls that happen when 2 people are both awake for no good reason. It started as background noise. Chase would invite me to family dinners, and Ivy would be there, and we'd end up doing the dishes together while everyone else watched football, arguing about whether pineapple belonged anywhere near pizza, whether her mother's potato salad recipe was actually good or just nostalgic, whether I had, in fact, cheated at the family trivia game 2 Thanksgivings ago. I had. I still maintain I hadn't. Somewhere in there, without a single dramatic turning point I could point to, the background noise became the whole song. I started noticing when she wasn't in a room. I started saving stories throughout my week specifically because I wanted to tell her first, before Chase, before anyone. I learned that she chewed the cap of her pen when she was nervous about an exam, that she cried during nature documentaries, but never during sad movies, that she thought people who didn't tip, well, couldn't be trusted with anything important. I never said any of it out loud. Chase had one rule, stated so many times it had become a kind of scripture between us: "Don't date my sister." He'd said it as a joke the first few times. By year 3, it stopped sounding entirely like one. He'd told me the story behind the rule exactly once, drunk enough to be honest and sober enough to remember saying it. His college roommate had dated his other sister for 8 months, and when it ended badly, it hadn't just cost the roommate a girlfriend. It had cost Chase a friendship he'd built over 4 years, and it had made every family holiday afterward feel like walking through a room full of furniture rearranged to avoid a specific chair. "I'm not saying it to be controlling," he told me, staring at his drink like it had personally wronged him. "I'm saying it because I've already watched it go wrong once, and I don't want to watch it go wrong with the 2 people I actually can't afford to lose." I understood it. I even respected it. It just happened to be standing directly between me and the one thing I wanted more than almost anything else in my life. So I filed Ivy under the category of things I wasn't allowed to want, the way you might file a wildfire under things you shouldn't touch. That didn't make the heat go away. It just meant I got very good at standing near it without catching fire. Or so I told myself, right up until a ferry terminal at 10 at night convinced me otherwise. "You're staring at the vending machine like it insulted your mother," Ivy said. "I'm deciding between the pretzels and the stale muffin. Get both. We have 9 hours to kill and a shared fate. I got both. We split the muffin, which was, as promised, deeply stale, and Ivy declared it historically significant in a way that made me laugh loud enough that a sleeping man 2 rows over stirred and glared at us. By 11, the terminal had thinned out. A few other stranded travelers had claimed corners for themselves. A family with 2 exhausted kids sprawled over 3 chairs, an older couple sharing a thermos, a college kid asleep face down on his backpack. The overhead lights dimmed to their night setting, and the fog outside pressed closer against the windows, swallowing the parking lot lights into a soft orange smear. "Tell me something you've never told Chase," Ivy said, out of nowhere, her voice pitched low, like it belonged only to the two of us and the buzzing vending machines. "That's a big ask for 11 o'clock. We have time." I thought about it. I thought about several true and dangerous answers, and set every one of them aside. "I hate marine biology," I said instead. "Some days. Not the animals. The tide charts. I became a marine biologist assistant because I liked the ocean, and now I spend most of my week doing math about the ocean." Ivy tilted her head. "That's not a secret. That's just a complaint." "Fine. I once let Chase win an arm wrestling match on purpose because he'd just gotten dumped and I felt bad. That's better. Weak, but better." She smiled into the dim light. "My turn. I applied to environmental law because I wanted to matter to something bigger than myself. And some nights I think I actually just wanted an excuse to argue professionally." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "No," she agreed. "They're not." We kept trading small true things back and forth for the better part of an hour. The kind of confessions that don't cost anything until you say them out loud and realize how much weight they were carrying. I learned she was scared of failing the bar exam in a way she'd never admitted to her parents. That she rehearsed answers to hypothetical interview questions in the shower because it made her feel less like she was pretending to belong in the career she'd chosen. She learned I'd almost quit the research station twice and stayed both times because of a stubborn refusal to let the ocean win, and that I still called my mother every Sunday, even though we mostly talked about nothing, because the ritual of it mattered more than the content. "Okay, harder round," Ivy said, pulling her jacket tighter against the terminal's air conditioning. "Something you've never told anyone. Not just Chase. Anyone. That's an escalation. We have 8 more hours. We might as well use them productively." I thought about it for a long moment, watching the fog thicken outside the window, a ferry worker in a reflective vest walking slowly along the dock, doing whatever mysterious pre-dawn ferry workers do. "I used to think," I said slowly, "that if I never said certain things out loud, they couldn't be used against me. That silence was a kind of safety. I've been doing a lot of that, for a long time, about a lot of things." Ivy went quiet in a way that felt different from the comfortable quiet before. "That's not really an answer. That's a description of an answer." "I know. Coward," she said, but there was no heat in it, just a softness that made the word land like something closer to affection. "Your turn," I said, deflecting the way I'd built a career out of deflecting. "Something you've never told anyone." She was quiet long enough that I thought she might let me off the hook the way I'd let myself off mine. Then she said, "I applied to a school in Seattle instead of the one 2 hours from here specifically because it meant I'd see you and Chase more. I told everyone it was about the program's environmental focus. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth." Something in my chest went very still. "Ivy, don't," she said quickly, cutting me off before I could finish whatever sentence I was about to attempt, half warning and half plea. "I'm not ready for whatever you're about to say. I just wanted it to be true somewhere out loud, even if it's just to a vending machine and an empty terminal at midnight." I let it go. I have thought about that decision more times than I can count in the years since. The version of that night where I pushed instead of retreated, where I said the thing sitting right behind my teeth instead of filing it away with all the others. But some nights need to arrive in their own order, and that one hadn't finished arriving yet. Somewhere around midnight, her voice started to soften at the edges, the words slowing down the way they do right before sleep takes someone by surprise. I'm not tired, she said, immediately after yawning hard enough to crack her jaw. Of course not. I have excellent stamina. Legendary. She laughed, quiet and warm, and then, without any announcement at all, her head dropped sideways onto my shoulder. I went very, very still. Here is the specific problem with having the person you have quietly loved for 2 years fall asleep on your shoulder in a nearly empty ferry terminal at midnight. Every single thought you have becomes a referendum on your own character. Do I move my arm? Do I let it stay pinned at this angle until the nerve endings file a formal complaint? Do I glance down at her face, soft and unguarded in a way she never let it be awake? Or do I look straight ahead like a man being interrogated by a fluorescent light? I looked straight ahead for exactly 4 minutes. Then I looked down. Ivy slept the way she argued, completely committed. Her breathing had evened out, slow and steady. One hand curled loosely against my chest where it had landed sometime in the last 90 seconds without either of us deciding it. A strand of hair had escaped whatever was left of her clip and lay across her cheek. I wanted, with an intensity that embarrassed me, to brush it back. I didn't. I sat there instead, arms slowly losing all sensation, doing the math on how long I could reasonably let this go on before it became something I'd have to explain. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I eased it out with my free hand, careful not to shift, and found a text from Chase. She hasn't answered me in an hour. She okay? I typed back one-handed. Ferry's delayed till 6 a.m. She's asleep. I didn't want to wake her. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Asleep where exactly? On my shoulder, I typed, and then immediately regretted every word of it. Okay, weird follow-up question, and I need you to answer honestly. Are you in love with my sister? I stared at the screen for a long time. Ivy shifted slightly against me, murmuring something that wasn't words, and settled deeper into the curve of my arm. Outside, fog pressed against the terminal glass, and somewhere out past it, a boat horn sounded low and distant, the kind of sound that makes a person feel very small and very awake at the same time. I typed 3 different answers. I deleted all 3. Why do you ask? I finally sent, which was, I recognized immediately, the coward's move, and Chase would know it. Because she asked me last week if it was weird that she'd been into you since she was 21, and I told her yes, obviously, and also please never tell me anything else about it ever again. The words sat there on the screen, doing absolutely nothing to help my heart rate. I read them 4 times. I looked down at the top of Ivy's head, at the small furrow that appeared between her eyebrows even in sleep, like she was arguing with someone in a dream. You there? Chase texted. Dean, I can see you typing and deleting. Just answer the question. I set the phone face down on my knee, very carefully, the way you'd set down something that might go off. My hand was shaking slightly. I told myself it was the cold air pouring in every time the terminal doors opened. It was not the cold air. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I existed in the strange, suspended zone between awake and dreaming, hyper-aware of every point where Ivy's body touched mine. Replaying Chase's text like a stone, I kept turning over looking for a smoother side. She's been into you since she was 21. 3 years. 3 years of Thanksgivings and dishwashing arguments and late-night phone calls where I'd told myself I was imagining the warmth in her voice because the alternative, that it was real, that it had always been real, that I'd spent 3 years standing an arm's length from something I wanted more than anything and calling it friendship out of loyalty to a rule her brother had made as a joke, was too much to hold at once. Around 2 in the morning, Ivy stirred, murmured my name. Just my name. Nothing else. The way you say a word you've said in your sleep before, and burrowed closer, her hand tightening slightly against my shirt. I looked down at her and felt something in my chest crack quietly down the middle, not breaking, just opening, the way ice does right before it lets you through. I didn't wake her. I stayed exactly where I was, arm dead from the shoulder down, heart doing something reckless and unauthorized, and let her sleep. By 4, The terminal had gone almost silent except for the hum of the vending machines and the occasional distant clang of something being loaded onto a dock. The fog outside had thickened further, pressing gray and formless against the windows, erasing the parking lot entirely. It felt, in that hour, like Ivy and I were the only two people left anywhere. She woke slowly, the way some people do, blinking against the terminal light, disoriented for a full 3 seconds before she registered where she was and who she was leaning against. "Oh my God," she said, jerking upright so fast she nearly headbutted my jaw. "I'm so sorry." How long was I? "About 4 hours." Her eyes went wide with horror. 4 hours? "Dean, why didn't you wake me up? You looked comfortable. You looked like a hostage." "I was a very willing hostage." That stopped her. She went still, studying my face in the dim light, like she was checking whether I'd meant that the way it sounded. I hadn't planned to say it. It had just come out, tired and unguarded, the way true things do at 4 in the morning after a night of no sleep and a brother's unanswered text sitting heavy in my pocket. "Dean," she said carefully, "what does that mean?" I could have deflected. I'd had 3 years of practice deflecting, turning every warm moment into a joke before it could become evidence. But I was exhausted in a way that stripped all my usual defenses down to nothing, and Ivy was looking at me like she already half knew the answer and was just waiting to see if I'd be brave enough to say it. "It means I've spent the last 4 hours with a dead arm and the best night of my year," I said. "It means Chase texted me at midnight asking if I was in love with you, and I didn't answer him because I was too busy finding out that I was." Ivy didn't move. For a second, I thought I'd miscalculated badly, that exhaustion had loosened something in me that should have stayed locked, that I was about to watch 3 years of careful friendship collapse in a fluorescent-lit ferry terminal at 4 in the morning. Then she said, very quietly, "He texted you that? That's what you focus on. I'm building up to the important part. Give me a second." She pressed both hands over her face, laughing in a way that sounded more like relief than amusement. "He told me last week he'd rather set himself on fire than talk about my love life with either of us. And now he's out here playing messenger pigeon at midnight. This is the same man who once left a room because I mentioned a date had held my hand at dinner. He held your hand for 4 seconds. Chase told me it was a national incident. It was a very tame dinner. He acted like I'd announced an elopement." She shook her head, still laughing, and some of the tension went out of her shoulders in a way I hadn't noticed building until it released. "The point is, if Chase is willing to break his own rule at midnight over text, something in him already knew this was different. He wouldn't have risked the conversation otherwise. In fairness, I think he panicked. He should. He made a rule specifically to prevent this exact conversation." She lowered her hands. Her eyes were bright, a little wet, entirely awake now. "Dean, say the actual sentence." "I need the actual sentence, not the ferry terminal poetry version." My heart was doing something that probably deserved medical attention. "I'm in love with you," I said. "I have been for a long time. I just filed it under things I wasn't allowed to want, because your brother said not to, and because I was scared that if I said it, and you didn't feel the same, I wouldn't just lose the chance. I'd lose you completely. And I would rather have all of you as a friend than none of you as anything." Ivy was quiet for 3 full seconds, which at 4 in the morning in an empty ferry terminal felt like several geological ages. "You absolute coward," she finally said, but her voice cracked in the middle of it, soft and unsteady. "That's fair. I have been in love with you since I was 21 years old, Dean. 21. I have watched you date exactly 2 people in 3 years and hated both of them on principle before I'd even met them. I have rehearsed telling you probably 40 separate times and chickened out 40 separate times because I was terrified it would blow up my entire family if it went wrong, and because Chase made that stupid rule, and because you never once gave me a single sign that it might be worth the risk. I gave you signs. You gave me nothing, Dean. You are a vault. I have seen bank safes with more emotional transparency than you. I let my arm die for 4 hours rather than wake you up. That's not nothing. That broke something loose in her." She laughed, wet and startled, and pressed the heel of her hand briefly against her eyes. Okay, fine. That's something. I said, my heart hammering now in a way that made the words come faster than I'd planned. May have been rehearsing telling you things since approximately the Thanksgiving you told me my trivia team cheated. You did cheat. That's not the point of the story. It's a little bit the point of the story. We were both laughing now, quiet and a little disbelieving, the kind of laughter that shows up right after a truth lands somewhere safe instead of somewhere it can do damage. The fog outside hadn't lifted. The vending machines still hummed. Nothing about the terminal had changed, and everything about it felt different. So, Ivy said, when the laughter settled. What happens now? Now, I said, I think I'm supposed to ask if I can kiss you. Except I've never actually done this before, and I don't know if there's a Ferry terminal appropriate version of that question. Her mouth curved. There's a very simple version. You just ask, can I kiss you? You could have led with that 4 hours ago and saved us a very long text exchange with my brother. Ivy. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. I kissed her. It wasn't smooth or cinematic. My mouth caught the corner of hers first because neither of us had done this before and both of us were laughing too hard to aim properly. But when it landed right, it landed completely. Her hand came up to my jaw. Mine found the back of her neck, careful, like she might still be something I could startle away if I moved too fast. She made a small sound against my mouth that undid every careful boundary I'd built over 3 years in about half a second. When we finally broke apart, she stayed close, forehead resting against mine, both of us breathing like we'd run somewhere instead of just sat in plastic chairs all night. Well, she said, that's going to make Thanksgiving interesting. Your brother's going to combust. Let him. He started this by playing messenger pigeon. She pulled back just enough to look at me properly, her eyes soft in the dim light. For the record, I wasn't actually asleep the whole 4 hours. I blinked. What? I woke up around 1. I just didn't want to move. Her smile went a little shy at the edges, a rare enough expression on her that it landed like something precious. I liked being there. I wasn't ready for it to be over yet. Something in my chest went entirely soft. You let my arm die on purpose. In my defense, you let it die too. We're both idiots. Compatible idiots. The best kind. The good feeling lasted almost exactly 11 days, which was how long it took for Ivy to sit me down on my own couch, twist her hands together in a way I'd learned meant she was working up to something difficult, and tell me she'd been offered a semester-long externship with an environmental law firm in Washington, D.C., 3,000 miles from Port Angeles, starting in 6 weeks. I applied for it back in the spring, she said. Before any of this. Before the ferry. I honestly forgot I'd even sent it in until they emailed. That's incredible, Ivy. That's exactly the kind of thing you've been working toward. I know. She didn't look like a woman who'd just received incredible news. She looked like someone bracing for impact. It's also 4 months, starting in 6 weeks, and I don't know how to hold both of those facts in my hands at the same time. This amazing opportunity, and also the fact that we just started this, and I don't want to be the person who gets something good and immediately finds a way to sabotage it out of fear. I felt something cold move through my chest, the particular fear of a man who has just gotten the thing he wanted most, and is now watching the tide start to pull it back out. Do you want to go? Yes, she said immediately, then winced at how fast it came out. I mean, yes, professionally, obviously yes. I've wanted something like this since I was 19. But I also want this. She gestured between us, helpless. And I don't know how to want both things without one of them costing the other. I sat with that for a moment, because it deserved more than a quick reassurance, the kind of easy comfort that sounds good in the moment and turns hollow the second things get difficult. I thought about 3 years of standing near a fire I wasn't allowed to touch, and how the entire reason I'd stayed silent for so long was fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of losing Chase. Fear of ruining something by wanting it too obviously. I didn't want fear to be the thing steering either of us again, not after we'd finally gotten past it once. Then we don't let it cost either one, I said. You go. I'll be here. We'll figure out the logistics because the logistics are the easy part. What almost broke us wasn't distance, Ivy. It was 3 years of both of us being too scared to say anything at all. We already did the hard part in that terminal. For months and a few time zones isn't going to undo that. Her eyes went bright, the particular shine she got right before she cried and pretended she wasn't going to. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's just worth it. Those aren't the same thing. She crossed the space between us and climbed onto the couch beside me, tucking herself under my arm the way she had in the terminal, like she'd already decided that was where she belonged. I was scared to tell you, she admitted. Some old habit still expects that wanting something for myself means I have to choose it over wanting you. My mother did that her whole life. Picked one, felt guilty about the other. You get to have both, I said. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is my arm. It'll just have to go numb over video calls for a while instead of in person. That got a real laugh out of her, wet and relieved. I'm going to hold you to a truly excessive number of video calls. I'm counting on it. She left for DC. 6 weeks later, and the 4 months that followed were harder than either of us admitted out loud in the moment. Late-night calls across 3 time zones, missed dinners, one bad week where a miscommunication about a canceled flight turned into our first real fight. But we kept choosing each other through all of it, the way we'd promised in that terminal. And when she flew back into Seattle in December, I was waiting at the gate with a stale muffin from the Ferry terminal vending machine, wrapped badly in a napkin, because some traditions are worth carrying 3,000 miles. She laughed so hard at the muffin that airport security glanced over. And then she kissed me like 4 months apart had only sharpened something that used to be soft. And I understood, standing there in a crowded arrivals hall, that whatever fear had kept me quiet for 3 years was never coming back. Outside, the fog had started, almost imperceptibly, to lift. A gray pre-dawn light crept in at the edges of the windows, softening the orange parking lot glow into something closer to real morning. The terminal loudspeaker crackled, announcing that boarding for the 6 a.m. crossing would begin shortly, and the small scattered crowd of stranded passengers began to stir, gathering bags, checking phones, blinking themselves awake. Ivy and I stayed exactly where we were for another minute, her hand laced through mine now, neither of us in any hurry to become 2 separate people again. You should probably answer Chase, she said eventually. He's likely had an aneurysm by now. I checked my phone. 14 unread texts, the last one reading. If you two are making out in that terminal, I want it on record that I called it in college, and nobody believed me. I turned the screen toward her. Ivy read it and laughed so hard, she had to lean into my shoulder again, which felt, this time, entirely different than it had 4 hours earlier. Not an accident I was carefully protecting, but a choice we were both making, in full view of the fluorescent lights and the vending machines and whatever was left of my dignity. We're together, I typed back. You called it. Never speak of the rule again. Chase's response came almost instantly. Deal. Also, I'm suing you for emotional damages from that midnight text exchange. Also, I'm happy for you. Took you too long enough. We boarded the 6 a.m. ferry together, still wearing yesterday's clothes, both of us running on no sleep and an entirely new understanding of each other. Ivy fell asleep again 20 minutes into the crossing, this time with no pretense about it at all, her head deliberately, unmistakably settled against my shoulder, my arm wrapped around her instead of pinned awkwardly beneath her weight. I watched the water pass beneath the fog as the island shoreline faded behind us, and the mainland slowly resolved ahead, and I thought, with a clarity I hadn't expected from a sleepless night in a terminal full of stale muffins and broken vending machine buttons, that I would take 100 more delayed ferries if it meant ending up exactly here. We told her parents 2 weeks later. Over a dinner, Ivy insisted on cooking herself, which meant Chase and I spent most of it exchanging nervous glances over a slightly overdone roast while her mother studied us both with the patient, assessing look of a woman who had clearly suspected something for longer than either of us realized. So, her mother finally said, setting down her fork, "How long has this actually been going on?" 3 weeks, Ivy said. 3 years, her mother said, without missing a beat, is what I'm asking about. Ivy went pink. I nearly choked on a piece of carrot. Chase, to his credit, simply put his face in his hands and said, I would like it noted for the record that I am the only person at this table who did not know any of this. You knew some of it, Ivy said. You just refused to hear the rest. There's a difference between knowing and being told, and I would like to continue enjoying that difference for as long as possible. Her father, who had said almost nothing through the whole exchange, finally looked up from his plate, glanced between Ivy and me, and said only, well, at least the roast is good, which, in a family that communicated largely through understatement, counted as a full and enthusiastic blessing. After dinner, while Ivy and her mother argued cheerfully in the kitchen over whether the roast had, in fact, been slightly overdone, Chase pulled me out onto the front porch under the pretense of needing help with something in the garage that turned out not to exist. So, he said, leaning against the railing, arms crossed. 3 years. I know how it sounds. It sounds like you kept something enormous from me for 3 years because of a rule I made when I was 23 and heartbroken about my college roommate. I respected the rule. You respected it so hard you both suffered through 3 years of pointless longing that could have just been a relationship. He shook his head, but he was almost smiling. I'm not mad, Dean. I want to be mad, structurally, on principle. But mostly I just keep thinking about how many Thanksgivings I watched you two do dishes together for 45 minutes over a sink that fits 2 people uncomfortably, and I never once put it together, because I didn't want to. You knew. I suspected. There's a difference, and I clung to it aggressively. He looked out at the yard, quiet for a moment. I just need you to actually take care of her. Not because she's fragile. She'd end both our lives for suggesting that. But because she doesn't let many people all the way in, and if you're in, you're really in, and that's not something to treat carelessly. I don't intend to. I know, he said. I wouldn't have handed you the messenger pigeon job at midnight if I didn't already believe that. He clapped me once on the shoulder, hard, brotherly, the closest thing to a formal blessing I was going to get from him. Welcome to the family, officially. Try not to make the next 30 years of holidays weird. No promises. Fair, he said. None of us have ever managed that. 3 months in, before DC and after it had already been decided that Ivy would go, we took Chase up on his standing offer to supervise a weekend at the family house on the island. Mostly, we suspected, so he could witness the relationship firsthand and confirm it wasn't some fever dream born of sleep deprivation and a broken Ferry engine. He spent the first hour watching us with the wary intensity of a man inspecting a bridge who wasn't sure what went way. By the second hour, watching Ivy steal food off my plate without asking and me handing her the rest of it without complaint, something in his shoulders finally relaxed. Okay, he said, over dinner, pointing his fork between us. I need to know one thing. Was it really the Ferry? 3 years of nothing, and a broken engine did what nothing else could? It wasn't the Ferry, Ivy said. It was the fact that Dean is emotionally constipated and needed exactly 9 hours of forced proximity and no other options before he'd say anything true. That's slander, I said. Mostly accurate slander, but slander. I'm just saying, Chase said, if I'd known a mechanical inspection was all it would take, I would have sabotaged that Ferry myself 2 years ago and saved everybody the suspense. You'd have gone to prison, Ivy said. Worth it, Chase said, and for the first time in 3 years, when he looked at me, there wasn't a warning behind it. Just something like relief, like a man setting down a rule he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it had a weight to it at all. Later that night, after Chase had gone up to bed, Ivy and I sat out on the back porch of her grandmother's old house, the same fog from the ferry terminal rolling faintly across the water in the distance, and she leaned her head against my shoulder in the exact position it had found that first night, like her body had simply filed the memory and returned to it on instinct. He's really okay with it, she said, half a question. He's more than okay with it. I think some part of him has wanted this as much as we did. He just didn't know how to say it without breaking his own rule. Runs in the family, she said, and I felt her smile against my shoulder more than I saw it. 6 months in, Ivy passed her first round of law school exams and celebrated by dragging me back to the exact ferry terminal where the whole thing had started, insisting we needed to properly commemorate the scene of the crime. We sat in the same row of plastic chairs, ordered the same stale muffin from the same vending machine, and split it while she read me highlights from a torts textbook in a dramatic courtroom voice that made two nearby travelers move seats. "You know," I said, "most couples celebrate anniversaries somewhere nicer than a ferry terminal. Most couples didn't fall in love over a delayed sailing and a dead arm," she said. "We don't get nice. We get sentimental and slightly uncomfortable plastic chairs. I wouldn't trade it." "Good. Because I already bought the tickets for the overnight sailing next month, too. I'm building a tradition whether you consent to it or not." A year after that first delayed crossing, I proposed on the same ferry, on the same stretch of water where the fog had first lifted around us, down on one knee in the middle of the observation deck, while Ivy stared at me with an expression somewhere between disbelief and the beginning of tears. "You're doing this on a boat," she said. "You built a tradition. I'm honoring it." I was joking about the tradition. I wasn't. I opened the box. "Ivy Rourke, I have loved you since before I let myself admit it, and I would happily let both my arms go numb for the rest of my life if it meant you kept choosing to fall asleep on them. Marry me." She said yes before I'd even fully finished the sentence, which she has never let me forget was extremely undignified of her, and which I have never let her forget was the single best moment of my entire life. Somewhere behind us, an elderly stranger clapped, a child asked loudly what was happening, and Chase, who had somehow smuggled himself onto the same crossing without either of us noticing, shouted from 3 rows back. Finally, loud enough that half the deck turned to look at him instead of us. We got married the following autumn, on the island where her grandmother's house still stood, empty boxes long since replaced by new furniture Ivy had picked out herself. The ceremony was small, held in the backyard under a string of lights her mother insisted on hanging herself despite 3 separate offers of help. And when Ivy walked out in a simple ivory dress, hair pinned back the same careless way it always fell out of its clips within the hour, I forgot, for a full 10 seconds, every single word of the vows I'd spent 2 weeks writing. "You're supposed to be talking," she whispered, amused, when the silence stretched a beat too long. "I'm recalibrating. Take your time. I've waited 3 years. I can wait through your recalibration." The vows, when I finally found them, were shorter than I'd planned and truer for it. Something about arms going numb and never once wanting to move them. About 9 hours in a ferry terminal teaching me more about honesty than 3 years of careful silence ever had. Ivy cried through most of hers, laughed through the rest, and at one point abandoned the printed card entirely to simply say, "I loved you before I let myself say it, and I am never going to make that mistake again," which got its own round of applause before the officiant had even finished the sentence that was supposed to follow it. At the reception, Chase stood up to give a toast, looked directly at me, and said, "I made one rule in this friendship. One. And it took a broken ferry engine to destroy it completely," which got the loudest laugh of the night and was, we both privately agreed, entirely accurate. 2 years after the night in the terminal, we bought a small house near the water, close enough that on clear mornings we could watch the ferries cross in the distance, small white shapes gliding slowly toward the mainland. Ivy had finished law school by then, taken a position at a small environmental firm in Seattle instead of the bigger one in D.C., because, as she put it, she'd already found the one thing worth staying near, and she wasn't interested in trading it for a corner office 3 time zones away. We furnished the house slowly, the way people do when neither of them wants to rush past the part where every object still means something. The chipped ceramic rooster from her grandmother's kitchen ended up on our mantel, exactly where it had sat for 30 years of spite, and Ivy insisted it stay there permanently, for the tradition, though I suspect the real reason was that she liked the story it came with. Chase visited often enough that he'd started keeping a toothbrush in our guest bathroom, and on one particularly loud Sunday dinner, 3 years into the marriage, he stood up with a glass of wine and announced, entirely without warning, that he was retiring the rule officially. On the condition that if either of you ever hurts the other, I reserve the right to reinstate it retroactively and take you both to court, where my sister will represent herself and definitely win. I would, Ivy agreed. She absolutely would, I said. Ivy still falls asleep on my arm most nights, sometimes on the couch, sometimes in the car, sometimes on actual ferries when we take the crossing just to relive it, and I still let it go numb every single time rather than move her, because some habits, it turns out, are worth keeping. What would you have done if your best friend's sister fell asleep on your arm during an overnight ferry delay, and neither of you said a word about it until morning? Have you ever had a night like that change everything between you and someone you loved? Tell your story in the comments. And for those who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.